Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our first Sloanie Chat. We are incredibly excited to bring to you today a discussion on the Greek financial crisis with MIT Sloan Professor of the Practice of Global Economics and Management, Athanasios Orphanides. From May 2007 to May 2012, Professor Orphanides served as a 5-year term as governor of the Central Bank of Cyprus and was a member of the Governing Council of the European Central Bank. Following the creation of the European Systemic Risk Board in 2010, he was elected a member of the first steering committee. Earlier, he served as a senior advisor at the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System, where he had started his professional career as an economist. Professor Orphanides obtained his undergraduate degrees in mathematics and economics, as well as PhD in economics from MIT. Later in our discussion, Professor Orphanides will answer some of the questions you submitted when you registered for this event. We will also be taking questions with the hashtag Sloanie Chat via Twitter. And now I hand it over to you, Professor. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Renee. It's my pleasure to do this. I have to say that I'm doing this from Lefkar. I'm supposed to be on vacation, but my vacation started with the latest round of the crisis in Greece. It's an opportunity to get in touch with the Sloan community, and I know that some of you took the classes I've offered the last couple of years on the Euro crisis. Others graduated long before I started teaching. Actually, some of you when I was a student in E52. So what I thought I would do is spend a few minutes giving a very, very broad introduction of what has been going on. So for some of you, it's going to be material that is well known, and then focus on what has been happening the last few months and last few days. The idea is to leave some time for questions that could still be asked, and hopefully I'll be able to address some of them. I did read the questions that were submitted in advance. I have to apologize in advance, it's too many, so many of them we are not going to be able to go over in great detail. But you know, you can actually find my email, so if there are things that you would like to get some information on, I will try to respond to emails the rest of the summer. This thing is not going to end anytime soon. So let me start with introduction of the euro. Euro is a currency that was supposed to be competing on a global scale with the US dollar. It was a currency that supposedly every member of the European Union at some point should adopt. Greece is one of the countries that adopted the currency back in the early 2000s. They actually did not make the first round because they did not quite meet the strict criteria that were required for the year. The euro as a currency in the Economic and Monetary Union in the European Union is a very unique project. It's a project that raised a lot of questions before it got created. It was introduced as a concept in the Maastricht Treaty that created the European Union in 1992. And what I can tell you is at the time, most European economists who were based in the United States were trying to advise the European governments that it was a bad idea and they should not go ahead with it. The argument was that there was not enough convergence of the different countries in Europe to make this succeed. One of the arguments that was made is that there was not sufficient political cooperation for this thing to succeed. And there was a concern that with imbalances that may be created with, as in open economy macroeconomics, and what is open economy macroeconomics understands problems materialize from time to time, it would be quite a hindrance to solve problems if countries did not have the tool of managing their own monetary policy and exchange rate. In the end, we had a success for about a decade. The currency was introduced in 1999, and frankly, until 2008, it worked very well. I recall the beginning of the global financial crisis. Countries in the European Union who were members of the euro area were doing better in many respects than countries that were not in the euro area. So 2008, 2009, things seemed to work. And then end of 2009, beginning 2010, that's really 5 years ago, plus a few months, we started having the Greek crisis. It has been already 5 years, and the things started unwinding. So I actually want you to, I'm going to show you some slides that I prepared for a lecture I gave a few weeks ago in Brussels that may be useful to give you an introduction of how we got to where we are right now and why the project failed. Let me see if I can switch to this one. If I can do this, actually start with this picture of the Renaissance. The reason I picked this picture is because this is a picture of the original scene. And in order to understand where Greece is today, it's important to understand how this whole thing started more than 5 years ago. The Greek program, the first Greek program, started in May of 2000, and we have an issue like that. We have an issue with the euro area since then. Just to give you a magnitude of the programs, let me walk you through some slides. Here's a comparison of real GDP per person in the United States and the euro area. If you follow this, you can actually see the global financial crisis. I don't know if you can see the cursor as I'm moving it around here. You see this period? Rene, can you actually see the cursor if I move it around here or not?
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. Okay, so you can see that global financial crisis, the euro area and the US economies, they actually moved in parallel. And then here we have the beginning of the euro area crisis, and you see how horrible it has been for the euro area. We have right now a very big discrepancy in the recovery in the United States versus the euro area. And you can ask, why did Europe fail? The answer that I think is probably the most straightforward answer to give, and then take you directly to what has been happening in Brussels just a couple of hours ago, today, for example, is that it's really mostly about bad politics. The problem in the euro area is that the European Union, when it was set up, did not create a mechanism that could handle crisis well. The euro area member states stayed sovereign. I live in Massachusetts in the United States. Massachusetts is a sovereign state, but Massachusetts is also part of a federation, the United States. And when you have a crisis in the United States, you actually have the federal government handling it. In the case of Europe, we do not have the equivalent government. We actually have the states needing to figure out how to handle a crisis. And the difficulty in the case of Europe is that with sovereign states, instead of cooperating together in order to get through the crisis, they started fighting it out. So what you had is what I call a triumph of local politics. I'm just showing you a few slides here with governments effectively fighting with other governments about who would incur the costs associated with the crisis. This is what created massive destruction in some member states. It has created winners, it has created losers, and this lack of cooperation at managing the crisis at the euro area level is what has cost the euro area so dearly. I'll give you some examples of winners and losers. So here you have the picture of real GDP per person for the 4 largest member states. You can see at the top, this is Germany. Like Germany, it's as if they didn't have a crisis at all, if you look at this line, relative to what had been happening before. They have France, Spain, Italy. Look at Italy, how terribly Italy has been doing. Real GDP in Italy right now, real GDP per person is actually worse than when these guys joined the euro area. So this has been a terrible crisis not just for Greece, but for others as well. One would summarize this about winners and losers, which is quite instructive. If you compare euro area member states with the United States, you will see that there is one member state, big one, Germany, that has actually done much better than the United States as a result of the crisis. A real big winner in the euro area. The rest of the euro area, according to the IMF latest projections, these are from April, from the World Economic Outlook in April, we're going to have to wait until the end of the decade before the rest of the euro area will reach a level of real GDP per person that would be the same as what it was before the crisis. So this is just an illustration of how badly the euro area has done, except for one country, Germany, big country, and Greece. This is the disaster we have in front of us. If you look at this picture, you can understand why there is so much animosity and resentment in Athens. Greek GDP is about 25% lower than what it was before the global financial crisis started. This is really on par, as has been pointed out by a number of analysts already, with the biggest peacetime disasters ever recorded in economic history. For example, Greek GDP and its outlook right now are worse than the experience of the Great Depression in the United States. This is some statement. I mean, look, I'm a macroeconomist. I grew up in E52, and one of the things that macroeconomists could take some pride in is that we could tell ourselves, you know what, we know how to help policymakers, governments, central banks do policy so that we're not going to have a disaster much like we had in the 1930s. And here we have one in 21st century Europe. So what's going on? What's going on is that in Greece, we had the original sin, really something that can be traced back to 2010. The problem of Greece being in the euro area in 2010 is that when it needed help as a result of being in the euro created a lot of imbalances. In Greece, the imbalance meant that cheap credit was available. Unfortunately, Greek governments did not use that to invest, increase capital that could increase future production, that actually fueled a government consumption boom. Same problem materialized in different ways in other countries. In Spain and Ireland, for example, we had a real estate bubble as a result of the imbalances that were due to the euro. In Italy, we had a very appreciated real exchange rate that did a lot of damage to the manufacturing sector. So the euro as a currency did not really lead to the uniform balanced growth that its designers would have hoped for when it was put together. And the imbalances were shown in different ways in different countries. In the case of Greece, what we had in 2010 was a situation where the country needed an IMF program, much like Hungary needed an IMF program after the global financial crisis, Romania, Latin American countries, and so forth. But Greece was different. Because Greece was in the euro area, the other countries in the euro area got involved, and they did not let the IMF handle the program. This is very important to keep in mind. One of the reasons why Greece is messed up today is because other euro area member states got involved in what would have been an IMF program in 2010, and bad things happened. The 2010 program was very badly designed and caused much of the trouble we have today. Let me show you some pictures about that. So this is a picture of the deficit to GDP ratio as it was in the 2010 program. This is the black line. And as it showed up in the IMF projections earlier this year, Greece had a massive deficit that needed to be corrected. You could see this here. The IMF program, at the insistence of Germany and others in Europe, had a very, very rapid correction. You can see how big this correction is. According to the IMF, this was the biggest correction, fiscal adjustment ever. This is the excessive austerity that so many people are pointing out was one of the reasons why Greece got in trouble right now. Notice from this picture, the Greek governments that have been running the place in the last 5 years, let me not get to the last few months yet, they actually delivered that. So what you see here in the red line is the reduction in the fiscal deficit to GDP ratio the last 5 years. So this is a program that was designed badly. It had excessive austerity, but the austerity actually was something that was implemented by the Greek government. But look at some of the things that did not happen. I have here a picture of the unemployment rate. The 2010 program suggested that the employment rate would really plateau at a level not exceeding about 15%. Instead, the economy completely collapsed, and we had the unemployment rate in Greece exceed 25%. They did the austerity as they were supposed to. They did not get anything else that was associated with the program. Here you see the collapse in real GDP. This is what the original IMF program had. This is what happened in practice. Nominal GDP debt. The debt to GDP ratio was supposed to peak at the level about 150%, then come down. Instead, it got much higher because of the collapse of GDP. A haircut on privately held debt was imposed by Germany, but it was so ill-designed that the debt to GDP ratio a year later was even higher than it was before a haircut. And this is part of the problem. So what exactly happened? How did we end up having such an ill-designed program 5 years ago, the original scene, and why does this matter today? And the answer is what is giving us the problems we have today. We have two narratives. It's actually interesting to compare these narratives because these are the narratives that you would have heard today in Athens and Berlin pretty much as well. The Berlin narrative is German taxpayers have been helping Greek government since 2010, and Greek governments have not managed to deliver. The country is still a mess. The narrative in Athens is something went terribly wrong in 2010. We did not have, Greeks say, we did not have a normal IMF program. The austerity policies forced Greece to go into a debt trap. And the question is, how do you get out of it? These are the differences in the narrative that you see from this. And depending on your point of view, you get very different answers to the question of who's to blame for this crisis and how do we get out of it. But it is useful to go back to some of the assessments that were made about why exactly was the troika program in 2010 designed so badly. And we have here a statement, just one sentence to give you an idea. This is from an interview that former Bundesbank, this is German Central Bank President Karl Oder made already in 2010. And what he said was that the program wasn't really about helping Greece. The program was really designed so that German banks and French banks could be saved from their exposure in Greece. And keep this in mind, this is the original scene. This is why we have all of these complaints about the role of the different governments that we're not out of. So this is where we were in I would say until last year. The Greek government we had before the current Greek government actually implemented the austerity measures I showed you already. They did pretty well in terms of implementing those measures. They managed to eliminate the fiscal imbalance. They were actually also eliminating for about half a year the current account imbalance that the country had. But as you saw, the the country was caught in a situation with excessive debt. And there was a year ago an agreement in principle to ease the debt burden of Greece, something that you will have heard about in the last few days as well. But Berlin refused to implement that agreement because they were not happy with the previous government in Greece with the implementation of some structural reform measures. For example, further cuts in Greek pensions, further increases in contributions, better collection of taxes, and so forth. That the German government was saying that the Greek government was not implementing as well as they should have. This impasse is what led us to a change in government this year. The Samaras government last year in Greece was unable to convince the Greek people that they were on the verge of getting out of the program, which they were. The constitutional system in Greece was such that the opposition party could force an election at the latest by March of this year. And the Samaras government ended up calling elections 2 months early in January of 2015. With that change, we got in Greece something that was not quite a very good scenario as it has turned out the last 6 months. We actually had the rise for the very first time in the modern history of Greece of a left radical populist party that was running on a platform of ending austerity and killing the troika, having a new start for Europe and so forth. And actually move out of the slides right now, so I can come back to this. So try to give you an overview as to how did we get to where we are right now. We have why we have the animosity that has materialized. With a new government in Greece, I'm going to say the following thing. The new government, now it's almost 6 months in place. One of the points they were making, in my view, is exactly right. The Greeks were cheated 5 years ago. They were over-indebted as a result of an ill-designed IMF program. And this is something that even the IMF has effectively recognized in both external reports that are available on the IMF's website, and more to the point, in internal reports that have been leaked. And it's been very interesting to be reading in the Wall Street Journal, for example, or in El País in Spain, leaked IMF documents that show just what a terrible job was done with the Greek program 5 years ago. So the Greek government was correct in having a grievance and asking for a compromise with the German government that really benefited massively from the design of the 2010 program. However, there was another element that they did not do properly in my view. They actually reversed many of the positive reforms that Greece needed that were implemented in the last 4 years. I'm not going to go into the details of this, but they actually started hiring back people into the bloated public service sector. They have undone some of the expenditure savings, and they have been refusing, really, in the last 6 months, I haven't seen anything of that, to do anything tangible to improve tax collection or a fight against oligarchs that unfortunately have been developing in Greece in the last several months. So even though I think they were fundamentally correct in having grievance against the rest of Europe, particularly Berlin, they actually messed up. They made a lot of enemies by appearing intransigent and really undoing good things that should have happened. Where are we now? Just to give you an idea of where we are now, I'm going to just show you a cartoon actually used in one of my in a lecture I gave last time I taught the crisis, which was in April, and we found this cartoon. So this is from The Economist. Now you will have seen it, will remember it. Let's actually see this cartoon. So this is from April 25th. Okay. For 6 months, really, we're playing a situation where the Greek government that was installed in January somehow has the impression that by driving the crisis to the extremes, the other countries in Europe will give up and give better terms to Greece. And you can see this cartoon with Prime Minister Tsipras having the impression that just any day now, the other European countries will give in to his demand. Now this was in April, but really this could have been last week. This could have been today even. It's the same picture. It's quite tragic to watch this, because what has happened in the last 6 months with the strategy that this Greek government has been playing is that the economy has taken a turn for the worse. Confidence has been lost. The banking system has been doing quite badly. There has been not a run out of banks, but there has been something like a jog from the banking system. More than 50 billion euro in withdrawals of deposits that are believed to have been converted to cash in shoe boxes, freezers, under mattresses, and in holes under the flooring of houses. These are just from stories from Greece. This has led problem with the banking system in Greece. The economy has been doing badly, so badly that the IMF last week issued a statement pretty much confirming what the Greek government saw as something that they thought was a positive sign. What the IMF said last week is that given the deterioration of the Greek economy in the last 6 months, the Greek debt level right now is unsustainable, and something needs to be done with the stability of the Greek debt level. So what's the problem? The problem is politics. What happened in 2010 and who has the debt problem right now? The trick that Chancellor Merkel and President Sarkozy played on the Greek government in 2010 is that they convinced the Greek government to pay the debt that the Greek government owed to French and German banks in full in 2010. And they gave them money from the French and German government and other governments in Europe. So what they've done is they've converted what used to be private sector debt that could have been handled if needed with a haircut, a restructuring with the private sector. They've converted that to public debt. Debt that right now the Greek government owes to the German government, the French government, and so forth. In this way, they bailed out the French and German banks. This is what the former Bundesbank president was talking about. But they created this immense political problem for Europe. So right now, when the IMF is coming out and is telling the Europeans, well, look, you've created a mess in Europe. Partly it's the fault of the Greeks. Partly it's the fault of the program. Partly it's the fault of Europe. Fix it. You need to have a debt restructuring. The question is whose debt is going to be restructured. That's going to be the debt that is owed to, let's say in Berlin, to the German government. This is what is creating this immense political problem that cannot be handled. So what's the answer to the problem we have? We have a political impasse that threatens really the existence of the European Union project and the euro. The other governments in Europe find it suicidal politically to give in to Greek demands. If Chancellor Merkel were to say, well, you know what, I made a mistake in 2010, I actually lied to the German people. I was telling everybody in 2010 that our banks were fine, and we could just lend some money to the Greeks and we'd get it back. But I lied. I knew this. Well, if you were to say that, then her political career is gone and her party is gone. She's not going to say that. If she were to try to have a stealth restructuring of the Greek debt, for example, these are the things that are being discussed right now. What if you give a 10-year holiday on interest payments to Greece and push the debt out for another 10, 20 years in terms of extending maturities? If they were to do that, they would face the wrath of other governments in Europe that have had to suffer through German-imposed austerity. The ones that are particularly critical for this year are Spain and Portugal. Why are those countries important? Because Spain and Portugal have mainstream governments facing elections by the end of the year. And if the German government were to give in to the Greeks, then those governments would have to worry that some radical left or some radical right government would actually go and tell to those people, see, the Greeks actually did much better by throwing the Ubans out and having a radical government installed. So they are facing political problems that are making a solution virtually impossible from their side. But what about the Greeks? Well, for the prime minister in Greece right now, Tsipras, I think we all have to admit that the guy is an exceptionally skilled politician. What does this mean in a democracy? Well, let me tell you something that may sound nasty, but I grew up in the Greek civilization and tradition, so I've learned about how the Greeks have discovered democracy. You know what else the Greeks discovered together with democracy? Demagoguery. They come together. Democracy, what are you trying to do? You're trying to actually have people vote for you. How do you do that? With demagoguery. And what we have with the current Greek government in Greece, unfortunately, is really an illustration of just how terrible it is when populism presents good arguments and wins government. Prime Minister Tsipras is actually an excellent politician, but he's an excellent politician because he managed to convince a big part of the population to support him when he has no solutions to the problem at hand. And when he made promises both in January and in the referendum that was run just a few days ago, that really do not correspond to reality. To give you an example of this, I'm coming to exactly the last couple of days. So on last Friday, Prime Minister Tsipras was trying to convince the Greek people to vote as he was recommending to a referendum, a nonsensical referendum that he called on Greece for Sunday. And this is what he was telling the Greek people. He was telling the Greek people, here are the choices. The choices are, you can vote yes to a program that other countries asked us with more austerity, more structural reforms. They asked us to take this unconditionally 2 weeks ago. We don't think it's a good program, but if you vote for that, we will implement it. They're trying to avoid the political cost if the Greek people were to vote for the rational structural reforms that are needed. Or, you're telling them, vote no for that. Vote that we are against austerity. Vote that we are against programs. And you know what? If you vote with me on this one, that will give me more power to go to Brussels and within 48 hours negotiate a much better deal with Berlin. He actually said within 48 hours. Well, right now, let me see. Yep, it's exactly 48 hours since the referendum was done. He won big time on Sunday, and 48 hours later, where are we? To facilitate him and his populism, the other Euro area member states called the summit earlier today. For those of you who are following, there was a a meeting of the finance ministers in the afternoon. That's a Eurogroup meeting. And after that, there was a meeting of the heads of states, prime ministers and presidents of the various states. The idea was, well, Tsipras told his people, prime minister told his people that within 48 hours he would have a deal. So the other government said, let's help him out. Let's actually call these meetings. Let's find out what is the plan that the Greek government will bring to us. Let's discuss this in the afternoon, and then hopefully we will be able to see whether we can reach an agreement. It turns out, for those of you who followed the news today, that the Greek government went to the finance ministers' meetings and had no plan. They presented a non-paper. Some of the insider commentary I've seen is that when the Greek side was asked, how come you didn't even bring us a proposal? Why do you have this meeting? The answer was, well, we don't really want to bring a formal proposal to you today, because if we were to do that, then that proposal might have been rejected. So we prefer not to bring one. And then they actually had a whole meeting in Brussels of the heads of states. This is a physical meeting. Actually, people actually get on a plane, they fly to Brussels for this meeting, all of the prime ministers of the Euro area, and all they had to say was, oh, well, there was no plans, there was no discussion. So, well, maybe we should reconvene in a few days. Let's figure out where this is going. So this is how the 48 hours within which Prime Minister Tsipras promised that he would have reached a great deal for the Greek people have ended. Where are we right now? Again, I pointed out we have a political impasse. The situation in Greece is tragic. Since the Prime Minister called a referendum about 10 days ago for the referendum that took place last week, there was actually bank run. We had a bank walk, jog from January until about 10 days ago. We had a bank run last week. It was so bad over a couple of days that the Greek government was forced to shut down the banks and impose capital controls. How bad? Well, sufficiently bad that they're allowing those who have ATM cards to withdraw up to €60 a day. They have pensioners who they claim have been, whose pensions the government claims have been deposited in banks, but the pensions cannot be withdrawn. They can only withdraw up to €120 per week of the pensions they have. This is, with the dollars for what, $125. That's it. This has been going on for 1 week. The banks are in dire strait. What the other governments are looking for here is say, well, okay, does the Greek government actually want to make this work, or do they want to get out of the year? The Prime Minister in Greece claims that he does not want to get out of the euro. He just wants more money from the other governments. But the other governments are not going to give you any more money. The Prime Minister in Greece is complaining that the European Central Bank is playing unfairly with them and not giving any more money. Well, the European Central Bank cannot give them any more money. That would be against the European Union Treaty. That would be monetary financing. It's not clear how the Greek government can get out of the impossible situation they've created for themselves. How do you resolve things like that? What's the summary? If you think about this, one of the questions I got was from a couple of you was, can we think about this in terms of a game? As the finance minister who just resigned, Varoufakis, being a game theorist, and he was trying to explain this is like a game. Well, yeah, we can think about this as a game in game theoretic terms. Well, what are the objectives of the different players in this game? Let me give you one of them that I think is very useful for understanding the motives that drive some of the moves we see. This is a game of various politically elected leaders in different countries, all of which would try to do the best for their countries, all of which are being concerned about a bad outcome for Europe, Greece exiting the euro area would be a bad outcome for Europe. But if a bad outcome were to occur, a primary concern for everybody involved is that they should avoid being blamed for it. And if you actually look at it like that, then you can actually look at the situation we're in right now. It's a situation where the blame game dynamic dominates. Other countries would not want to be seen as pushing Greece out. The government in Greece does not have a good solution. It's not clear they even have a plan where they're going right now. One option they have is that they could try to extract a good deal and then just sign whatever Berlin is telling them and implement the program. And maybe 2 years from now, Greece is going to be in as good a situation as they were a year ago. But another, unfortunately, possible outcome right now is that they accidentally get out of the euro. What I mean accidentally? Well, they don't have money. They will not be able to continue to give the 50 or 60 euro to per week or per day to the retirees that expect their pensions next week. They're actually physically running out of currency. The banks cannot get any more currency from the European Central Bank because their collateral is not considered trustworthy right now. One of the ideas is that perhaps the Hungary government will start issuing script. You may remember California tried that during the global financial crisis for a while. The problem is Greece is not quite as credible as California when it comes to these things. So if they start issuing script, that would be a way to get out of the euro. If they were to get out of the euro, they would have to default on the debts they have. If they were to default on the debts they have, where would that leave them? And where would that leave the EU? How would Germany respond to a government in the European Union that has defaulted to the Central Bank of the European Union? That may actually happen on July 20th, when government bonds maturing that the ECB holds, government bonds that the ECB holds are maturing, and the Greek government doesn't have the money to pay them. So we'll actually have this scenario coming in the next 2 weeks. So where does that leave us? So you have some questions. Contagion. Are we going to have contagion in the rest of the world if we have a bad outcome? For example, an accidental exit. Nobody will want to claim that they're planning it, but frankly, the probability is quite high that it may happen. So I'm going to call that an accidental exit, okay? So what are the implications of that? What's the contagion that might happen? Let me split that into two parts. One is direct economic contagion, what we've observed with Lehman, for example. That cannot happen in the case of Greece. In the last 5 years, Berlin has done a wonderful job of ring fencing Greece from the rest of the euro area. You actually have to admit the German government, they know how to plan much better than the Greek government. And they have done that very well. The exposure of the private sector in Europe to Greece is minimal. Countries are exposed because the Greek government owes money to the German government, for example, but not banks. You don't have that. At the same time, the ECB is prepared for this. As you know, that the ECB started purchasing government bonds with a QE program recently. If there were concerns in, say, Italy, Spain, or Portugal, what they could do is they could increase the pace at which they're buying government bonds in those countries and stabilize the market. So I would see maybe just a little bit of a weakening of the euro, but really not much of a direct economic contagion. That's one element. However, there is a bigger risk that really we should worry about, and I'm very happy to see that even though people in Europe don't seem to be particularly worried about it, people in the US are worried about it. What is that risk? We have a geopolitical risk of Europe breaking apart. If Greece gets out, accident or not, the question that will stay with us will be who's next and who is taking decisions in Europe. Is it the case that we have one government in Berlin, for example, that has so much leverage that they can effectively be scheming to kick some country out if that country is refusing to take directions from them about how they should be running their economic policy? If that's the case, who else is at risk? So this is one element. It's actually one of the reasons why everybody in Europe is trying to avoid this outcome, because it would leave a permanent negative mark on Europe. That's not going to be, they're not going to be able to reverse that. Geopolitical risks, there are more of them. Greece is a member of NATO. Greece is in a neighborhood that is not the most peaceful neighborhood in the southeastern corner of Europe. Greece has had historically a number of people who would have wanted to have greater ties with Russia. It would be quite a considerable risk if Greece is handled badly by its European partners, if you could still call them partners in that scenario, and effectively is forced to look for allies elsewhere. I think that would be a terrible scenario for the Western world, and it could even get worse from that point on. So I can actually see geopolitical risks of contagion, of opening up issues that we don't have right now in Europe, even though the economic elements are actually quite contained in my view. So this in terms of the risk. Actually, see, what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if you have any more specific questions, things I haven't covered, and I see I have another one here, which is about historical parallels of the Greek financial crisis and what has happened elsewhere. Well, there is I have to admit something. I'm a Rudy Dormer student, okay? So it's, I know some of you will know who Rudy was, German economist, spent most of his career at MIT. And I learned a lot about crisis from him and the history of crisis. Pretty much everything we've seen in this crisis, like the bits and pieces, the technical elements, and even some of the scenario about what might happen, we've seen before. Hey, what happens if countries split and you introduce a new currency? We've seen that before. What happens if a country tries to maintain a strong currency and then they have to give up? And you have different scenarios that have some parallels. For example, one that comes to mind very frequently is Argentina, and the fact that they had to get off the US dollar standard, and they've been in a mess for a while. Still, these parallels are not quite exact. So Greece is in a special situation because the euro is such a special new thing. It's a monetary union that doesn't have the state behind it. And in addition, you have an incomplete political union in the back. So if Greece were to get out of the euro, if Greece were to adopt a new currency, in principle, if it were left to do this on its own, it could have been doing much better than it is doing right now. But would this be a recommendation for Greece to get out? Is this really a fair comparison? Well, not really, because we do not have any precedent for any euro area member state abandoning the euro, and we do not know how the other countries in the European Union would actually treat Greece in that case. If the other countries were to help Greece, then you would have had a scenario of a devaluation leading to growth. Then, Italy might want to exit the euro a year later if that happened. But you can understand that the dynamics are such that some of the other countries might actually not want Greece to do well if it were upset the euro area, this would lead to a scenario where Greece could be kicked out of the European Union. That would lead again to uncharted waters in terms of where we are politically. So there are some parallels with different countries, but none of them are exact. So let me see. I'm going to take a couple more questions here to see. Oh, that's an interesting one kind from the U.S. What are the parallels of the situation with Puerto Rico? Very few, I'm afraid. Very few. There is one parallel that is quite important, and that is that it's a political question. There is a political element of the question in both sides. In the case of the United States with Puerto Rico, you can actually see the federal government weighing, the cost and benefits of allowing in default in Puerto Rico. But actually, in the United States, we do have precedents with states defaulting. And we have a precedent with state defaulting, not really contaminating the rest of the economy, because the federation in the United States works so exceptionally well in so many other respects. I know Puerto Rico is not, strictly speaking, state, but for the things I have in mind, they actually do get the benefits of being virtually a state. There are a number of things that are simply not available in the euro area and the European Union for a state that is in trouble that are available in the United States. Let me mention one that came up in other questions I did not mention earlier: the banking system. In the United States, you don't really have to worry about the banking system of a state collapsing if the state is collapsing. I live in Massachusetts. Yeah. I don't have to worry about my bank accounts being raided by the Massachusetts government if the Massachusetts government cannot pay its bills. Unfortunately, in Greece today, that's exactly what you have to worry about. And people in Greece today are facing the prospect of having haircuts on their deposits, not because they've done anything wrong, but simply because the government needs money. And when someone needs money, and it's an entity that has the authority to do this, you go where the money is, and the money is the banking system. So you can have something like that. So there are some similarities, but really not. It's not a parallel situation at all. So let me see. What other questions are coming up here that I should. Okay. So how can we get out of this? Is this really a financial problem or not? Very difficult question to address. One of the problems we have in Europe is that we do have people of very different mentalities. What happens when in one state you get captured by populist government? This is effectively what has happened in Greece right now. What's the way out? There is really no way out other than the country collapsing and the voters in that country realizing that they've made a mistake and then voting a different government in place. That's an extremely costly process, and in the process, it can create problems for the other member states. This is what we see right now. There is no protection from a federal entity because there is no such thing as a federal government. Europe, the euro area today is really something similar to what the United States were before the adoption of the Constitution, when the United States were governed by the Articles of the Confederation. This is a point that has been made in the past by me. It's a very important point to understand why there is really nobody who can try to find a solution that would be a good solution for the whole, for Europe as a whole, or for the euro area as a whole. And I'm afraid that because of this problem in the political design of the euro area, we're going to have ahead of us a lot more pain before we get a good solution. In a way, the United States were very lucky in that they had this, I'm going to say, Europeans who actually pushed for for the constitution, because some of them were actually Europeans, like Alexander Hamilton, for example, and set up the United States as we now know that is a much, much better, more stable political framework. So, any more questions quickly? Would it be better for Greece to get out of the euro? Well, that's what I pointed out before. It might have seemed an obvious answer. Why don't you get out of the euro and devalue the currency and then see if you can do better? It would have been better if they could have the support of the other countries with a new currency. But the incentive of the other countries may be such that they would not help them, but they would actually try to obstruct their progress out of the euro, for example, with trade restrictions and even all sorts of legal bubbles that could go on for years and years and years, because the exit from the euro will be associated with defaults. Again, think about it politically. Why would other governments want to do that? Because if they did not do that, then they might have other countries, and voters in other countries would want to get out. Think of Italy. Let me remind you, I showed you early on that real GDP per capita in Italy right now is even lower than it was in 1999. So Italy would be an obvious case of a country that would have done much better outside the euro than inside the euro. Why are they like that? Because they have a currency that is too rich, and they would have wanted to devalue if they were outside. You cannot play that game that the whole thing will unwind. Let's see. One more question, maybe. I have a question here. It's very tempting because it's on the politics. Kind of, so what are the political interests involved? I'm an economist, right? So I'm not a political scientist. But watching Europe and watching it up close, I had a 5-year European vacation, as René mentioned at the beginning, in the middle of the crisis, before coming back to the United States and start teaching at Sloan. What I've noticed is just how crucial the political dynamics are. But who are the stakeholders when you have a political problem? The stakeholders are mainly the elected governments and elected leaders in the different states. One of the difficulties of finding a cooperative solution that would be beneficial for Europe overall is that those solutions usually would have some government, some elected leader who is facing re-election within 6 months or within a year or within 2 years, who would do better by rejecting that solution. And Europe is a confederation. You actually need unanimous agreement among the current governments to implement a better solution. Because of the political difficulties and the election cycles that are asynchronous, you always have some government, could be a German government, could be a French government, could be an Italian government, who may wish to simply push a good solution further out a year later, 2 years later. It's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to get out of this situation. So, I don't want to close with a very pessimistic message. It may be very difficult to avoid it, but I will close with this other parallelism that has been made in the past, and that is with Hotel California. And we know how that story goes. Well, the problem is that you should not have gotten in the first place. And once you are in, it's not clear how you can get out.
Great. Thank you so much, Professor. This was fantastic. And thank you to all of you for joining us this evening. We hope to bring you many more chats like this. And for those of you who registered, we'll be sending you an email in the coming days with a survey to see how the experience was and also to give you some of the information in the recording from today. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to the MIT Sloan Office of External Relations. A big thank you to Professor Athanasios Orphanides and to all of you. Have a great evening.